Welcome into HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm your host, Kevin McPherson, and good afternoon. It's a Tuesday afternoon as I cue from the 501 to talk Arkansas Razorbacks men's basketball. It was a busy Monday. I was able to be out in front of and break a couple of items important to Razorbacks basketball. The Hoop Hogs, getting back onto campus this week. Start of fall classes is Monday, so we're going to learn more and more about this upcoming season 2.0 under John Calipari as the head Hog. That'll play out, and we'll have a front seat ticket for all of it and talk about all of that. But recruiting never stops, right? There's not on pause, constantly doing that. And a couple of big recruiting notes that we were able to again break the news on yesterday. You might have seen it on my social media account on Twitter, also known as X, or you might have checked out where I posted this over at HogvilleNET. So some of this might not be news if you've already seen it for you yesterday, but for some of you that haven't, this will be breaking. This will be intel and breaking news for you. We talked about Anthony Sprat Jr., class of 2028 out of Benton, as potentially the next player that Calipari identifies, as a player that in state that he's going to offer. We know the first two in-state offers that went out have the transition and the transaction has turned into commitments. Isaiah Seeley, who's a part as a freshman of the upcoming team, and we know J.J. Andrews, the five-star in the class of 2026, Seeley 2025, J.J. Andrews 2026. He made his commitment announcement in May. So we've talked a lot about those guys, but we've also been talking about Anthony Sprat Jr. all the way back in June when we came here and broke the news, gave you intel. This is why intel is important, even if you don't think it's a whole lot at the time. You're like, why are you talking about class of 2028 player in June? That's kind of down the road. And we came here and told you that John Calipari was going to be in Kansas City in courtside to watch Anthony Sprat Jr., a 6'6" wing on a Benton freshman on a veteran-loaded Benton Panther squad last year that won the school's only ever state championship in basketball, the 5A state title, a nail-biter against Maumelle. Sprat was a big part of that as the freshman who was getting significant playing time, not always in the starting lineup, but really good player. We got to see him play multiple times last year against Arkansas competition down at the King Cotton Holiday Classic in December when he was going up against some of the better national, some of the teams from across the country. That's always a really strong national field that the King Cotton puts together. And so we've seen this young man in multiple settings, including Brad Bill Elite 15U, which is the spring and summer organization. We know all about Brad Bill, right, with J.J. Andrews, players before him from Arkansas like Moses Moody, Nick Smith Jr., and there are more. But Sprat seems to be that next guy. So we were talking about Calipari going to see him in Kansas City in June. Then we told you in July that we had a source that was quoting, effectively paraphrasing what Calipari told them. And it's that Sprat will likely be the youngest player that I've ever offered a scholarship to. And we talked about that on the show last month. We brought that up, and that's what Calipari said. And we said at the time you'd have to really go back and look at the historical data to see, did he actually offer somebody that was just out of their freshman season of high school and hadn't even started their sophomore season yet? And then that would be contingent upon him actually extending an offer. So it was looking ahead, and how soon would that be? We also told you that Anthony Sprat Jr. was efforting an opportunity to come onto Arkansas's campus for an unofficial visit. It just hadn't happened yet. So several things we laying out the breadcrumbs for this to happen. And this is why talking about these things in advance is important, because it helps establish, not only the chronology of things, but you understand before the offer comes out that Arkansas has been recruiting a player either actively, not so active, maybe it's passive, but this seemed like it was ramping up to something. Well, sure enough, I got the call yesterday, said all of that to get to the point of what the new information is. Anthony Sprat Jr. has picked up an Arkansas offer. This is the first class of 2028 offer, regardless of where you are in the country or in the world, from Calipari extended to that class, incoming sophomore at the high school level. It very well may be the earliest that Calipari is extending an offer. Thank you for the compliment on the first comment. I appreciate that. So there it is. And we were talking about that before. Like, Calipari's the one telling folks this might be the earliest that he's extended an offer. Again, I don't know if he's done this before, if he just doesn't remember. I'm not sure about it either, but it ranks right up there. So it's impressive. You're like, why go on about that? Well, because a couple of things. Calipari said if he could identify players in state that he thinks can help and be part of what he's doing and building, and we know the level that he expects when he's recruiting and the quality that he expects for the teams that he assembles, it's a big statement to go after somebody that young and pursue someone that young. He played really well, I was told, in Kansas City the day that Calipari was there to see him, but he's played well a lot. Double figure score for Brad Bill Elite on average, and well over 35, I think 36% from three when you look at the spring and summer grassroots with BBE 15U. But Sprat again at 6'6". I've watched him play a lot, and I like his mid-range work. He can finish above the rim, obviously. May still be growing. A good three-point shooter. But he's got real craft already for a freshman. What I saw last year as a high school freshman, some really nice craft, and older players that were trying to defend him, he gave them fits. And he was one of those guys that he could spark for 20, 25 points in any given game. So that speaks, I think, to the talent level and also his confidence level at such a young age and being that good. And I've seen young players before, guys like Moses Moody. We can go down the list that are similar position-wise, size-wise, or height-wise anyway. And the ones that hit, you can almost you see it kind of soon and early, and then you don't have to worry about, well, are they going to ever grow to a size that translates to high major? Well, he's already 6'5", pushing 6'6". So, college wing height and size, he's already checked that box. Now it's just about his game and talent level, and Calipari has evaluated him. Remember, I told you at the end of Nike Peach Jam, I think it was Chin Coleman that was courtside to watch him in one of his last games. It might have been his last game in Peach Jam, but that John Shire, the head coach at Duke, was also courtside. As was, I believe it was Bruce Pearl with Auburn. So, we'll see what other offers come his way. He's going to get a lot. But he'll take part in, this is a little more information for you, he'll take part in the CP3 Rising Stars. It's for freshmen and sophomore, high school freshmen and sophomore, 9th graders, 10th graders. And I think that's next week out in North Carolina is where that usually is. So he's taking part in that event. And then he may start taking some unofficial visits pretty soon. So keep an eye on that. Remember, the recruiting dead period ends on August 20th. So it was the 4th through the 20th. After that, it's a quiet period, and players are allowed to go on campuses. Head coaches can't go out and recruit right now during a quiet period in terms of in-home visits or on high school campus or whatever. And of course, schools just getting back in for some at that time anyway. But he'll be able to go on campus after August 20th. So let's pay attention to that and where he might take unofficial visits. But this is good news. Not only, and another in-state kid, it's the third one. And then you ask, well, we've heard good things about Seeley, incoming freshman. We know what J.J. Andrews just did on a national scene. Can Sprat be that kind of guy? And I say, well, let's keep our eyes on it. I don't see any reason why he can't be at the level where, you look at the offer and you think, well, that was earned. That was equivocal of the kind of player you want. If you're only taking 3 or 4 freshmen every year, he fits the bill as one of those guys. So you always don't want to jump the gun on saying, oh, surefire, can't miss, no doubt. There's almost none of those, right? Even once in a generation type of players, this early, it's hard to say that. But if your head coach with the track record Calipari has makes that initial offer, you got to feel good about it. And so that was news that we put out yesterday on social media first. We're talking about it now here today. The other thing that we broke yesterday, just moving on, Clower, the 6'7", maybe pushing 6'8", wing, small forward out of the state of North Carolina. Arkansas is getting in late on him. We talked so much about the long-term relationship building with Calipari, getting on players 2 years, at least a year before it gets to the point where you're trying to get them on campus for those last official visits, then get them committed and signed maybe by November in the early period. You look at Clower, and that's a guy that Arkansas got in late on Clower. Offered him at the end of Nike Peach Jam, and he'd already had a list of top 8 teams out. Well, Arkansas is one of 7 teams that we know about getting a visit. Well, we've been talking about that. In fact, yesterday's update was the source intel was that the staff and Clower were still working on finalizing his visit date. We came on early in the morning, 5:30 a.m., did our segment, got out before 6. And so that was the talking point, that was still in process. It hadn't gone away just because it'd been over a week that we'd heard that Arkansas made the offer. And then a story came out, an article came out that Arkansas had a visit set up, but there were no dates announced. A couple of segments, we actually gave you intel saying, well, the date's not established yet. That's why it's not out. They're finalizing that. Well, it got finalized. So I reported yesterday on Twitter/X, and I posted this over at HogvilleNET. Clower's dad, Scott Clower, reached out to me to say the Arkansas visit is set up for October 3rd through the 5th. That is an open date weekend for the football team, so there'll be no football game on campus. We've seen in most of the visits that have been set up now, this is the fourth one where we have dates established. The fourth one now, 3 of those, there's no football game that weekend. Thank you for the great information. Woo Pig, go Hogs. Good stuff, good stuff. And everyone, I appreciate it. Thank you for being here to get the information. But Cole Clower's coming in. Again, this guy is a sharpshooter. He's one of those guys that can change how defenses prepare, scout, and it can affect personnel. Anytime you have a guy that can stretch the floor and then see over the defense because they have good size out on the perimeter, you always like a player like that because it just changes things. You know, I mean, the most recent example of a guy that Arkansas had like that was on the previous staff, the previous team. He didn't play a whole lot, but it was a guy like Joseph Pittman, and you saw the 2 big moments that he got against Ole Miss and Missouri. He made the most of those, scored 13 points in each of those games, but it changed everything, every dynamic, because that was a poor 3-point shooting team. Well, we know last season Arkansas didn't exactly have a strong 3-point shooting team. You could say it was a poor one, and then we don't know about this year. That's probably the biggest question mark in terms of what all that talent and veteran and retention and, you know, what's still hanging out there is maybe potentially a weakness. But a guy like this changes that dynamic. Just one guy can do that. And I've made the pro comparison with Cole Clower to Duncan Robinson, who's in the NBA with the Miami Heat. You know, there's other comparisons we can make, but Cole has got good size. He's got good craft. If you run him off the 3 line, he's creative. He'll drive all the way to the basket and finish above it. But if you cut off a drive with him, he uses his pivot foot well. He's got some counter moves, a nice fadeaway, good mid-range work. Got that big frame, big college-ready size. He's good sized. He's not like a string bean at 6'7", 6'8". He's you know, he's solid at that height. And then he's got, we talked about it, over 35% at nearly 7 3-point attempts per game in the Nike EYBL session play, sessions 1 through 4, averaging over 15 points and I think 4.5 rebounds. So that's really solid work that he put playing with CP3 Team CP3 on the Nike EYBL circuit, 17U obviously, in the spring and summer. Not as good and as efficient in the Peach Jam week, closer to 31.5%. His volume went down from between 6.5 to 7. It went down to just a dip just below 6, 5.9 attempts per game. That's okay. The games Calipari that I know he was courtside for, he went off. We've talked about all this. Had a 5 of 10 game from 3. And a 4 of 8 game from 3. A couple of games Calipari I know was courtside for him. Now look, I mentioned he's got 7 other visits. The other visit dates we've talked about at least at one point. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the teams are North Carolina State, North Carolina, the 2 home state schools, Florida, Alabama, out of the SEC, UConn, and then and Kentucky also out of the SEC. So you've got 6 other teams that he's visited. Those dates have been out there. The only other visit date aside from Arkansas that I hadn't seen was UConn. Scott Clower, Cole Clower's dad, shared that date with me as well, and that's in mid-September. I put that out on my Twitter account yesterday. You can check out those other visit dates. The Arkansas visit, again, early October, the 3rd through the 5th. It kind of falls in the middle of the other visits. And so we're not here to tell you that Arkansas is in the top 2 or 3 in this process with this player. We're just here to tell you that anytime Calipari pursues a player, even if it's last minute, in this instance, it's kind of late, once he gets them committed to a visit, I always say advantage Calipari. It doesn't mean that I automatically think Arkansas is in the lead, but I think they can make up ground because of that. And then you never know, can they do enough to go into the league and secure a commitment. This would be, Calipari's had this caliber of player in the past, but it's not his, annual. When you look at wings, it's more about athleticism and certain other traits annually. And so, he'll put out, 2 or 3 offers in the same class to guys that maybe have more similar attributes than not. This guy brings a little bit of different qualities when you talk about that shooting than most of the guys he targets, especially at that wing spot. So, and I think it's a positive. I think this guy could help Arkansas. So there's that. All right, over 15 minutes in. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. Those were the big 2 splash items that I reported yesterday. They were both breaking news items. In fact, I haven't seen the Clower visit dates published anywhere else to this point, at least for Arkansas and UConn. So that's out there now. You know about that. The Anthony Sprat Jr. offer was a big deal because, again, it's in-state. I think anybody, when you're identifying an offer from Calipari, takes notice, right? Everybody nationally takes note of that. But especially now that he's the coach for the Razorbacks, you're not only taking note of that, but there's a special quality about the in-state players because most of the state rallies behind the top players in the state. They want them. They want those guys to be Razorbacks. Doesn't always work out that way, but so far Calipari's 2 out of 2. He's 100%. And so he's probably going to maintain that track record. So I can't say today is Arkansas the leader for Anthony Sprat Jr. It's a long way to go, but I think they're the leader for Anthony Sprat Jr. I'll just say it that way. All right, we've got some more intel on a couple of players that we've been talking about the last few days. How significant? I don't know, but it could be. It could be. One of those is Tay Kenny, the 6'2" guard out of Kentucky, plays at Overtime Elite. We know he's got his Arkansas visit date set for, September 26th to 28th. He's the lone visit that's set up where we know the dates. That happens on a weekend that the football Hogs are hosting a game at Reynolds Razorback Stadium, where the fans are there, where the recruit gets to see more based on that than they might see in another setting. The news with Tay Kenny is we've been talking about, well, who are the leaders? He's got visits already taken to the in-state schools, Louisville, Kentucky. Those have already happened. I believe he's visited Purdue, Texas, some other programs he's going to visit. And Arkansas, from what we've seen, based on what we know has been scheduled, gets the last visit. Again, September 26th to the 28th. And some people think that means something good. Sometimes it means absolutely nothing at all. Sometimes the last visit never happens because there was a team that either emerged or was already in the lead and they get visits before and the player just makes a commitment announcement, cancels the last visit or last 2. So you just never know how that plays out. And we've been saying for a while, what we've heard is in terms of a leader is Louisville. Tay Kenny plays on the Adidas circuit. Louisville's an Adidas school. Those things get funneled sometimes. It's an in-state school. Kentucky would also maybe be in the mix. I have a source that I talked to quite a bit that weighed back in on this yesterday. We had a conversation about it and brought up Tay Kenny's name and said, look, I'm hearing that this is down to Louisville and Arkansas potentially. You never know, but with these visits coming up, if something could change. But as of now, that's what it looks like now, that maybe even Arkansas is ahead of Kentucky, and it's potentially Arkansas, Louisville. So I thought that was an interesting take because I had not heard. What we've said all along is don't sleep on the relationship. We told you before. Let's go back through the intel that we've given you. Kenny was the first class of 26 player that Calipari offered when he became Arkansas's head coach. Before J.J. Andrews, before some of these other top-level guys. Kenny's a top 15 rated 5-star in that 2026 class. I have him 12th on my board. I put out a top 25. I've got him 12th. He's a playmaker, scorer, facilitator, good athleticism, high IQ player. Really like Tay Kenny. But of all things we've said, Calipari, the fact that they were recruiting him when they were still at Kentucky, the staff. So the relationship's beyond since he's been in Arkansas, now going into year 2. And then the Overtime Elite connection there, getting players like, for years, but since he's been at Arkansas, Carter Knox and then Malik Thomas. And so there's all kinds of scenarios that put this right in the wheelhouse for Arkansas, maybe to close the deal on Tay Kenny. And then again, you're getting him on campus for a visit. Again, advantage Calipari in most cases against the field on what he can sell. So there's all kinds of positives here. But to have a source to say they think it's maybe Louisville and Arkansas, and they're not fully sure that Louisville is the foregone conclusion. That was the other part of that. Some have thought, this is just a matter of time. He's going to end up at Louisville. That may very well be how that plays out. But I found it very interesting that's coming from a source, and you hear different things. I've talked to several people that have said keep an eye on Arkansas for Tay Kenny, but it's based on the stuff that we've been talking about for a while. So I just baked that into, that would make Arkansas a serious contender, maybe above some other schools, because he's taken multiple visits outside of just Louisville and what he's already taken with Louisville and Kentucky. So I find that interesting. A little intel update for you on at least one perspective on what could be developing here. If it's down to a 2-horse race, based on this source, it's Arkansas and Louisville. So we'll see what happens. Mika Murren, little source info for this. We talked about a lot about him lately, that Arkansas is still pursuing him. The staff acknowledging that, this is a guy that is still in their sights, still pursuing in it to win it for class of 2026. A lot of talk about him maybe reclassing. That's quieted down. We'll see what he does, but Arkansas still in the mix there, considering going over to Europe again later this month. It's late August through some parts of September, the Euro Cup that Murren is planning to participate in, which is, we didn't see him in the spring and summer. He was not on the Nike EYBL circuit after teaming with J.J. Andrews the year before for that Nike Peach team at the 16U level. So we talked about all that. So one of the things we brought to you maybe a couple of weeks ago was we had a source, and when he looked at his top 7, Arkansas is obviously in there among a group of other teams, but Kentucky's one of those. And we mentioned that we had heard that maybe Kentucky had backed off. And that was the reporting there, coming from a source, not something that I had direct knowledge of, but coming from a source that maybe Kentucky was backing off and moving in a different direction. We know that Kentucky has Christian Collins and a flood of other players, but a similar position value in Christian Collins coming in for an official visit. So maybe that, I was trying to put two and two together. Maybe that's why. But now it's circling back that maybe Kentucky is efforting a visit again. This has been going on for over a year. If you remember, he took the visits last year in September to Utah, then Michigan. Then he took that Arkansas official visit, Mika Murren, 6'10" forward out of Finland, versatile guy. But he took that OV to Arkansas in late September. But he was, at the time when we talked about it on the shows, the reporting was he was going to schedule a visit with Kentucky, then it didn't happen. Then it was coming back that he was going to set up a visit with Kentucky, then it didn't happen. So, and then he had a Duke visit scheduled right after Arkansas that initially it was reported he postponed, but he never took that visit, as far as we know. So, but now Kentucky's circling back into possibly efforting and working on getting him in for a visit. This is why we always put disclaimers out, and you wonder, well, what did he just really say? You said one thing, you said, but it could go this way, because that's how recruiting is. If you're looking for an exact science, run somewhere else. It won't be recruiting. Things change. Needs, one player that you like at a position group and you think you're honing in on might bump somebody else out, except when that gets derailed or something changes, now you might go back to plan B or whatever the structure is and how you recruit, things come back into play. And so maybe Kentucky's going to be back in the mix to get a visit from Mika Murren. So we just want to give you that in case you see something like that splash and there's a visit date announced. You're like, wait a minute. McPherson told us a few weeks ago Kentucky might be moving on here. Looks like they are. So I always throw in disclaimers. They're important. 24 minutes in. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm Kevin McPherson. We like bringing you the recruiting stuff, but we got to talk. We got a team moving back onto campus. We got a team coming back onto campus this week. They're going to get back, not only start school, but they're going to get back to those limited practices briefly before it ramps up to the full-blown effect. You get up to, I think, 20 hours on court per week once you get there. And then we know how it'll roll through September. Then in October, you get into your exhibition season. My ears eagerly await your information. Wow. Well, that's one opinion, isn't it? I think some ears will claim that they bleed, but that's okay. I do the best that I can, guys. I think it's what should matter the most is content. I sometimes forget that delivery matters too. I am repetitive a lot, partly because I know maybe some join in a little later than others and it needs to be said again, but also because a lot of times what I say gets misconstrued, twisted and whatever, and I just repeat that. So I want you to hear the same messaging. So hopefully it sticks. A lot of you probably don't have that comprehension problem, most of you, but it's for the select few. And it's not to pick on them. I don't really bring that up and talk about it as one of the reasons, but I do meander a little bit and sometimes repetitive. But thank you for that compliment. I guess I need to learn how to take one of those. 25 minutes in now. Let's talk about what Calipari said about this, his perspective. It was a recent interview. I believe it was John Rothstein on a podcast that came out last month. I think it was July still. And Calipari said something very interesting. Talking about if he's going to win or if you're going to win, just a general statement, you really kind of need, when you're talking about a Final Four or being a title contender, a national championship contender, said you really need two players that are top 10 level players. And I thought that was interesting for several reasons. One is the way he's recruited over the years and what he did at Kentucky. Multiple times he had top 10, more than one top 10 rated guys when he looked at the NBA draft. Just his last Kentucky team had two players go in the lottery. They both went in the top 10, Reed Sheppard and Rob Dillingham, for example, just one example. So over the years, so he's had that kind of stuff before. But when you think about the modern era of college basketball and something that he's had to embrace, something that he's had to now deal with and make some adjustments to, is the fact that it's veteran teams. It's the portal that help build the strength of your roster typically. Not that you're not going to get it done with some really great freshmen too, and he's not going to let that just completely slide. He said that. That's still a blueprint for what he does. It's just not as in as much volume. Not half your roster, 3 or 4. But to say 2 top 10 players, well, what's novel about that? How many times have you heard, well, to be one of the great teams in college basketball, you need at least one pro, maybe 2. That's another way of saying that. But I think it's a little different even now. It's not just about who's a pro. It's about how many really good veterans can you put together and build a team with chemistry, and it makes sense. And if you look at the last few NCAA tournaments, and you're seeing more and more 1 seeds not get upset. You're seeing more and more of the chalk holding up. I mean, Arkansas was Cinderella in the Sweet 16 last year. A team from the toughest league ever that had its share of quality wins was Cinderella as a 10 seed. So you get the picture. And so I started thinking about 2 top 10 players. Let's take a look at that. So I just looked at last year. I went and looked at the top 15 players according to the Associated Press, basically the first, second, and third team All-American teams. And you could say, well, an All-American is not necessarily the best player. Well, not in terms of who might get drafted. That's true. But it's a snapshot of who are the players, the movers and shakers, the top players on typically the top teams in college basketball. And most of those really are the best players in the country. Only one freshman in the first, second, and third teams Associated Press last year. One freshman, that's Cooper Flagg. You know that, Duke. And he helped lead Duke. Con Knippel, they had multiple lottery picks that were true freshmen last year. So Duke was kind of the outlier when you looked at the Final Four. The rest of the teams, it's not like there weren't any good freshmen, but Auburn, Houston, and your national champion Florida Gators, it was all about the veterans, right? And guys that have been in the mix for a while, and some really good players. And so when you think about it from those terms, this NBA draft that just happened, it had like an unprecedented amount, I believe, or it was projected to. It had a lot of one and done, had just come off true freshman seasons going into the NBA draft lottery. It was true freshman heavy when you looked at the draft. So the draft and what college basketball is becoming because of the transfer portal and the need for veteran players, they're not necessarily in agreement with each other when you start talking top 10s. How many of the Associated Press All-Americans went top 10, top 15 lottery, or even went in the first round of the draft period? So you could say, well, that's kind of that way in a lot of years. I think it's becoming more and more pronounced. I think it's more and more pronounced that your All-American teams might not reflect what the draft looks like. Okay, so there's that. So when Calipari says top 10, I tend to think whatever he means by that, I think what it needs to mean is that you've got at least 2 All-American caliber kind of guys. Not necessarily have to be top 10 level players when the draft rolls around, but they need to be All-American flavor, All-American quality. Can Arkansas put that on the court this year? That's what we're going to talk about more and more on the upcoming episodes. I wanted to lay the groundwork for why I'm going to go there and why I'm going to suggest player A has a shot at an All-American season. We've talked a lot about guys that have all-league potential. Let's notch it up a little bit and see, what does Arkansas need to do to have – how does Arkansas emerge with 2 top 10 players nationally? It's not far-fetched, but it's also not just something you should assume is baked in to what the roster looks like. So we're going to talk about candidates for who that might be. Some of these will be obvious things. And we've said a lot about guys like 5-star freshman Darius Acuff Jr., Carter Knox, projected maybe as a first-round draft pick in a year's time. Trevor Brazile, the way that he looked at the end of last season, the way that he's looking now, adding good weight, his demeanor, the things we saw in that 1 hour open window of practice. I mean, that's a small sample size, but there's more than one way that this could possibly shake and bake. And so we're going to talk about that in upcoming segments. I wanted to set it up today. 31 minutes in. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. We're going to get out of here. If anything breaks, it's important enough to come back on and do another live today, we will. If not, we'll probably be back on early in the morning. If you haven't done it already, please hit subscribe, like, and share. It helps us out. We hope you like the content. We hope you like both doses of breaking news yesterday. We were glad to bring that to the Arkansas Razorbacks fan base. But until next time, thanks for being here. Take care of yourselves. Appreciate all of you. Be good in your endeavors. See you soon.